If you find yourself in the unfortunate situation of being involved in the court system, there's a lot of paperwork you're going to be hit with. One of the first piles of paperwork you'll get is something like this. It's basically a charging packet, and it's got 3 different components. I'm going to walk you through that today just so you can kind of understand what it is that you're looking at. You'll get this paperwork at arraignment, which is probably your first time to walk into the courthouse. Hi, my name is Marcy Fassio. I'm an attorney with Fassio Law. We're a criminal defense firm here in Oklahoma City. So we're going to walk you through this paperwork and tell you what it is and explain a little bit about what the state has to have, what evidence they have to have in order to prove that you have actually committed the crime they've accused you of. There's basically 2 or 3 parts to this paperwork. The first part is the information. That's the first page, and it basically has your name, the court, and what you're charged with. So in this video, we're going to talk specifically about DUI. So if you were charged with 1 count of DUI, then the first page here, the information would say, count 1, DUI. And it would set forth the specifics of your charge. What date, what location, things like that. The second part you may or may not have. If they are accusing you of having prior convictions, they will file something called a page 2 that lists out any prior convictions that you have. The third part, and what we're going to spend most of our time discussing today, is the probable cause affidavit. An affidavit is basically a sworn statement, so the officer who's involved in your case is going to write this affidavit, make this sworn statement that sets forth why they believe there is probable cause that you committed a crime. It could be just like a paragraph long, could be a page long, but it's going to have just a very brief summary of the evidence they believe they have that shows you committed this crime. So again, if we're talking about the example of DUI, a probable cause affidavit is going to include things like the date, the location, how they identified you as the driver of the vehicle, why they determined you were under the influence. Again, just a very brief summary that'll be supplemented later by more thorough reports. So the probable cause affidavit has got to set forth the information that shows how they plan to prove, or how they believe that they have evidence to prove all of the elements of a crime.
The elements of a crime is almost like thinking about a recipe. So anytime you made something as simple as a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, there's a recipe for that peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You have to have your peanut butter and your jelly and your bread to make your sandwich. It's the same way with the elements of a crime. You have to have the perfect recipe to meet the elements of the crime that the police and the DA's office are alleging that you have committed. And so when we as attorneys look at a probable cause affidavit, we're trying to decide, are the elements of the crime that they are alleging you have committed within the statement of the probable cause that that police officer is saying to support the charges the DA's office is going to file against you. So these types of charges, first of all, on a DUI is supported by 5 elements. So
first element is driving. Clearly you can't be charged or convicted with driving under the influence if you're not even driving a vehicle. If you're just sitting outside on the sidewalk and you're drunk, you might have a charge for public intox, but they can't prove that you're driving. That means they can't charge you with driving under the influence.
The second element is only made more complicated by the fact that there are several ways that they can prove your intoxication. And so you could be driving, secondly, with a blood or alcohol concentration of 0.08 or more. There's also the opportunity to be driving under the influence if you're under the influence of drugs, other intoxicants. So those nuances kind of depend on your case specifically, but most importantly, the state is going to have to allege and support evidence that somehow you are under the influence, whether that is a 0.08 alcohol concentration level, or you have given indications that you are under the influence of drugs, other intoxicants. They're going to have to prove, obviously, some type of degree of influence on your part.
Element number 3 is it's got to be a motor vehicle. So again, they cannot charge you, they cannot convict you for the crime of DUI, driving under the influence, unless they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you were driving a motor vehicle. So what that means, it's got to be a vehicle that has a motor. In other words, a car, a truck, an SUV, a semi, a motorcycle. All of those are vehicles that have a motor. What wouldn't work would be a bicycle, a scooter, rollerblades, any type of vehicle or means of conveyance that didn't have a motor would mean they haven't proven the third element. So in order for them to charge you with DUI, they've got to have element 1, element 2, and then element 3.
And the fourth element that we're going to address is obviously you have to be driving somewhere specifically to be driving under the influence of alcohol in a place they don't want you driving. So once again, these things are also a little bit more nuanced depending on where you are and what's going on. So the easiest thing is that you're on a public roadway. You're driving on the street, you're driving on a highway, somewhere that we all understand this to be a place where we drive. It gets a little more complicated when you're, say, in a homeland parking lot and you're drunk and driving in the parking lot. That is still technically driving under the influence of alcohol in a public area because that parking lot has access to a public roadway. So you still could be arrested DUI for driving in a parking lot if there's access to the public road. The last and final element is that a blood or breath test has to be administered from you, the defendant, within 2 hours of arrest or as soon as possible and as practical if there's been a fatality incident with your DUI.
So that kind of also shows you that there can be different ways that the element can be proven, but we'll just take the most simple example. Let's say you're pulled over after driving your motor vehicle on a public roadway and the officer asks you if you want to take the breathalyzer test. So let's just say you said yes. In that case, you're going to be taken to the police department. You'll put a mouthpiece in, you'll blow really hard. You've probably seen it on TV or maybe you've done it yourself, and there's a machine that registers your blood alcohol content. Again, there's different ways it can be proven that you're DUI, but in this specific example where you took the breathalyzer test and they have a BAC, the fifth element here is just saying that that test has to be administered within 2 hours of arrest.
So those things pretty much make up our recipe for DUI. So if we're looking at a probable cause affidavit and seeing that this recipe has been put together to make this crime, then obviously the best course of action is for us to discuss with you the strengths or weaknesses of the evidence in the case against you and formulate what's the best creative way, the solution to help you for this type of crime if the bow is tied pretty much on what's going on with what you've been charged with. Otherwise, if we're looking at the crime and there's issues, then obviously we will sit down and discuss that with you and see what legal remedies do you have if these elements are not being met, if the recipe is not there. What steps do we now take to help you deal with that situation if we feel as if the elements are not where they need to be.
Just as a very silly and simple example, if we get the probable cause affidavit or later when you get the rest of the police reports, if it says you were driving a bicycle on a public roadway and you had a blood alcohol content of 0.08 and they charge you with DUI, what happens, Emily?
We're not there, you're on a bicycle.
That means we win. Because they can't prove the element of a motor vehicle. But that just gives you an example, a very simplistic example of the things that we're looking at. Most of the time it's going to be a lot more nuanced, a lot more complex, and that's what we're here for, to go through that with you and help you discover how strong is the case against you. Have they proven all the elements? And then depending on the strength or weakness of their case, we discuss your options and find out what's the best course of action for you. If you've been charged with a DUI or any other type of crime and you need help with this kind of stuff, feel free to reach out to us. We can give you a free case assessment where we can go through these things. So just click the link below and you can check out the case assessment, check out our website, or just call us and we'll see what we can do to help.